Receptionist humbles simple elderly woman without knowing she's the hotel owner in disguise. Margaret Johnson felt her heart race as she walked through the luxurious lobby she herself had helped design 40 years earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her small rolling suitcase, and the simple beige hijab covering her grey hair contrasted with the sophisticated surroundings. The receptionist, Ashley Wilson, didn't even look up when the elderly woman approached the marble counter. She was busy on her phone, typing messages while chewing gum with disdain. "Excuse me," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying a faint Arabic accent that had lingered after decades in the United States. Ashley sighed loudly, as if interrupted from something extremely important. She glanced up for just a second, made a disapproving face, and returned to her phone. "Yes," she replied, irritation clear in her voice. "I have a confirmed reservation. The name is Margaret Johnson." The receptionist finally set her phone aside, but her expression remained utterly dismissive. She looked Margaret up and down, noting her simple clothes, the worn-out suitcase, and the hijab she deemed out of place in such a refined setting. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked with a sarcastic smile. "Because this is a 5-star hotel. Maybe you got confused with some motel nearby." Margaret took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had expected this reaction, but it still hurt deeply to be treated this way in a place she considered her second home. "I'm certain, dear. I made the reservation a week ago by phone. A single room, 3 nights. Ashley rolled her eyes dramatically and began typing on the computer with exaggerated slowness, as if doing a great favor. "I don't see anything here in the system," she lied shamelessly, without even checking properly. "Besides, even if there were a reservation, I'd need proof of income, a premium credit card, and 2 business references." "But that's not standard for regular bookings," Margaret said gently. "For people of your profile, it is," Ashley replied, pointing disrespectfully at the elderly woman. "We need to make sure we'll get paid, right? I'm sure you understand." The manager, Michael Thompson, watched from a distance, leaning near the elevators. A middle-aged man with neatly trimmed grey hair and an impeccable suit, he made no move to intervene. Instead, he smiled faintly, approving of his employees' behavior. To him, this attitude protected the hotel's image from people he deemed undesirable. Margaret noticed some guests stopping to observe the awkward scene. A couple of business people whispered to each other, discreetly pointing in her direction. A blonde woman in expensive jewelry filmed with her phone, likely to post it online as something amusing. "My dear," Margaret tried again, her tone even more patient. "I really need to stay here. Could you check again? Maybe the name was spelled differently." "Look," Ashley leaned forward on the counter with an expression of false patience. "Let me be very clear with you. This hotel isn't for just anyone. Our guests are executives, business people, important people, people who can pay without needing installments or discounts." The words struck Margaret like a knife. She had built this place on the exact opposite philosophy, to welcome everyone who walked through its doors, regardless of background, religion, or social status. "I can pay," Margaret insisted, pulling an envelope of cash from her bag. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Ashley looked at the envelope with even greater disdain. "Cash?" She laughed loudly, drawing more attention. "What kind of person carries around so much money in their bag? That's really suspicious, you know?" The insinuation was clear and offensive. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Around her, the conversations of other guests grew louder. Some were taking pictures, while others made nasty comments about immigrants and people from other cultures. "May I speak to your supervisor?" Margaret asked, trying to maintain her dignity. "Of course," Ashley waved over Michael, who approached with an air of authority. "Manager, this woman insists on staying here, but she doesn't meet our standards." Michael examined Margaret with the same prejudice the receptionist had shown. His expression grew harsher as he took in her hijab, simple clothes, and advanced age. "Ma'am, I understand your situation," he said with false compassion. "But our hotel caters to a specific clientele. I can recommend some more suitable options for your budget and needs." "I don't need recommendations," Margaret replied firmly for the first time. "I just need you to check my reservation." "We have no reservation under your name," Michael lied outright. "And even if we did, we'd need to follow our security protocols. People from outside sometimes don't understand our procedures." The phrase "from outside" dripped with prejudice. Margaret realized it wasn't just about her not being a regular guest. It was about her Arabic origin, her religion, her appearance. A young executive waiting to check in stepped forward timidly. "Excuse me," he said to Michael, "but I think you're being unfair to her. She just wants to confirm her reservation." Ashley immediately turned on him aggressively. "Mr. Bryan, I suggest you stay out of matters that don't concern you," she threatened. "I could review your reservation too and find a problem that forces me to cancel it." The young man paled and backed away immediately, ashamed of his own cowardice. Margaret looked at him sadly, recognizing in that moment how fear made good people stay silent in the face of injustice. "See?" Ashley turned back to Margaret. "He understood he shouldn't interfere where he's not wanted. You should too." Michael whispered something in Ashley's ear, and she smirked, nodding in agreement. "You know what?" the receptionist said loudly, drawing even more attention. "I think you'd be better off looking for the city's mosque. Maybe they'll have a place suitable for someone like you." The religious remark was the last straw. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control the pain in her chest. It wasn't just personal humiliation, it was the destruction of everything she had believed in when she built this place. "May I at least use the restroom?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "The restrooms are for guests only," Ashley replied coldly. "There's a gas station 3 blocks from here." Margaret began to feel unwell. Her blood pressure was rising dangerously, and she needed to sit down. She leaned discreetly against the marble counter. "Are you feeling all right?" asked a young maid passing by carrying clean towels. "Jasmine," Ashley snapped at the employee, "get back to work and stop interfering where you're not needed." The maid, a young brunette in her early 20s, looked at Margaret with compassion but didn't dare disobey. She lowered her head and continued on her way, visibly disturbed by the situation. Michael was growing impatient with Margaret's prolonged presence in the lobby. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask security to escort you out," he announced loudly. "You're disturbing our guests." He signaled to 2 security guards who approached immediately. They were large men in uniforms with intimidating expressions. Margaret noticed every eye in the lobby was fixed on her. "I'll leave," she said with dignity, even as her legs trembled. "I don't want to cause any more trouble." "Great," Ashley clapped sarcastically. "Glad you finally got the message." Margaret walked slowly toward the exit, taking in every detail of the place: the marble columns she had personally chosen, the crystal chandeliers imported from Europe, the paintings on the walls she had collected over the years. Everything seemed different now, tainted by the experience she had just endured. At the revolving door, she stopped and turned one last time. The doorman, old Joe, a black man with white hair who had worked there for 15 years, watched her with a puzzled expression. There was something familiar about her face, but he couldn't quite place it. "Ma'am, have we met before?" he asked hesitantly. "Maybe," Margaret replied with a sad smile. "Maybe so, Joe." Hearing his name only deepened his confusion, but before he could ask anything else, Michael appeared and scolded him for talking to strangers. Outside the hotel, Margaret walked to a bench in the square across the street. She sat down slowly, feeling the weight of her age and the humiliation she had suffered. She pulled a simple cell phone from her pocket and dialed a number. "Lawyer Richard, it's Margaret. I need you to come to the Grand Plaza Hotel." "Yes, that one. There are some urgent matters I need to resolve." As she waited, she watched the activity at the hotel. Guests coming and going, all treated with reverence and smiles. The difference in treatment was stark and painful. Inside the hotel, Ashley celebrated their victory over the troublesome woman with Michael. "Did you see how she just walked out like that?" The receptionist laughed. "People like that need to know their place." "You did the right thing," Michael agreed. "Our clientele can't be mixed with just anyone. It protects our brand." The reception phone began ringing insistently. Ashley answered with her fake professional tone. "Grand Plaza Hotel. Good afternoon. How may I help you? I need to speak immediately with the person in charge of guest services, said a deep, serious voice on the other end. There's been a very serious incident involving a VIP guest. What VIP guest? Ashley asked, confused. We haven't had any issues here today. Mrs. Margaret Johnson. We've received a complaint about discrimination and mistreatment. Ashley froze. She looked at Michael, who had gone pale upon hearing the name. There must be some mistake, she stammered. That person isn't even our guest. Of course she is. She's had a reservation for a week and has been our VIP client for decades. I'm the attorney handling the hotel's legal affairs. Michael snatched the phone from Ashley's hand. Lawyer, this is Michael Thompson, General Manager. There must be some confusion. The person you mentioned doesn't fit the profile of our VIP clients. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer's voice grew even more serious. Are you questioning my word? Mrs. Margaret Johnson is... Well, you'll soon find out who she is. I'm on my way to the hotel with important documents. The call ended abruptly. Michael and Ashley exchanged increasingly uneasy glances. Who do you think that old woman is? Ashley murmured. No idea, Michael replied, but a sinking feeling was growing in his stomach. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 20 minutes later, a distinguished man in his 50s hurried into the lobby. He carried a leather briefcase, and his expression was grave. It was Richard Parker, a lawyer and personal friend of Margaret for over 2 decades. Where is Mrs. Margaret Johnson? He asked Juliana directly. She's no longer here, the receptionist answered nervously. What do you mean she's not here? She has a confirmed reservation. Sir, Michael tried to intervene, there was a misunderstanding. The person you mentioned didn't present proper documentation to stay at our establishment. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out some papers. Proper documentation, he repeated, incredulous. Are you talking about the founder and majority owner of this hotel? The silence that fell over the lobby was deafening. Ashley felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Michael began to sweat, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. This can't be, the receptionist stammered. The owner is a sophisticated modern woman who decided to make a discreet visit to evaluate how her staff treats people who don't fit the usual clientele, Richard finished coldly. A practice she's done regularly for years. Michael tried to downplay the situation. Lawyer Richard, if there was a misunderstanding, we can easily resolve this. Where is she now? Sitting on a bench out front, humiliated and deeply hurt by what she witnessed here today, Richard replied with contained anger. And it's not the first time. She has detailed reports from other visits where she was mistreated by prejudiced staff. Ashley began to cry, realizing her career was over. I didn't know, she sobbed. If I'd known she was the owner. That's exactly the problem, Richard interrupted. You only respect people when you know who they are. Respect should be equal for everyone. Old Joe, the doorman, approached timidly. Lawyer Richard, I knew I recognized that woman from somewhere. It was Mrs. Margaret. She used to come here often, talk to me, asked about my family. Then why didn't you say anything? Michael scolded. Because every time I tried to speak up, you told me to mind my own business, Joe replied sadly. She changed after her husband passed, started dressing more simply, traveling without luxury. But she was always the same kind-hearted person. Richard put the papers back in his briefcase. You have 1 hour to fix this. Mrs. Margaret will decide whether to simply fire those responsible or sue the hotel for discrimination. The choice is hers. Michael rushed after the lawyer. Please, Lawyer Richard, let's talk. Resolve this amicably. It was just a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding happened because you judged someone by their appearance and background. Richard stopped at the door. That has a name, prejudice, and it has consequences. In the square, Margaret was still sitting on the bench, watching the city go by. Richard approached and sat beside her. How are you feeling? He asked gently. Tired, Richard. Very tired, she sighed deeply. 40 years building this place with love, and this is how my own staff treats me when they don't know who I am. Do you want me to sue? We have enough for $1 million case. It's not about money, Margaret shook her head. It's about real change. A lawsuit would just be revenge, but it wouldn't change hearts. Then what do you want to do? Margaret was silent for a few minutes, watching people pass by. She saw families of different backgrounds, elderly, young, ordinary people, and those more refined, all deserving the same respect. I want a second chance, she finally said, for them and for myself. What do you mean? I'm going back into that hotel, but this time as the owner I am, and I'm going to propose something that could change that place forever. Richard smiled, recognizing the determined spark in his friend's eyes. You have a plan, don't you? I always do. Margaret stood up slowly. Shall we? When they entered the lobby again, a crowd of employees was already waiting. The news had spread quickly. Ashley was crying uncontrollably, Michael was sweating nervously, and other employees watched with fear and curiosity. Margaret walked slowly to the center of the lobby. Everyone watched her in absolute silence. She removed her hijab, revealing well-kept grey hair, and for a moment she seemed more familiar to some of the older staff. Good afternoon, she said firmly. For those who don't know me, my name is Margaret Johnson Williams. I'm the founder and majority owner of this hotel. Some employees whispered among themselves, others lowered their heads in shame. 40 years ago, when I created this place, I had a dream that it would be a refuge of genuine hospitality for every person who walked through our doors. Rich or poor, American or foreigner, young or old. Everyone deserved the same respect. Ashley tried to approach to ask for forgiveness, but Margaret raised her hand, asking for silence. Today I discovered I failed miserably in that dream. My own employees humiliated me because they judged my appearance, my age, my background. That broke my heart. Michael finally found the courage to speak. Mrs. Margaret, I take full responsibility. The fault is mine for not training the team properly. Please fire only me. Mr. Michael, Margaret looked directly at him, I admire your attempt to protect your employee. But the responsibility belongs to all of us. Me, for not creating better training systems. You, for allowing prejudice to take hold of your hearts. She walked to the front desk and stood behind the counter, as if she were working there. Ashley, come here, please. The young woman approached, trembling, expecting to be fired in front of everyone. Tell me one thing, Margaret said softly. Why did you treat me that way? I don't know, Ashley cried. I thought that people like you shouldn't be here. People like me? Margaret repeated. Do you mean elderly people, people who wear hijabs, people who dress simply? All of those things, Ashley admitted shamefully. I was wrong, so wrong. Yes, you were. But do you know what hurts me the most? It's that you weren't being mean by nature. You were taught to think that way. Our society taught you to judge people by their appearance. Margaret turned to all the gathered employees. How many of you have ever faced prejudice in your lives? She asked. Several hands rose timidly. Joe, the black doorman. Jasmine, the housekeeper from a humble background. Marcus, a night shift receptionist who was gay. Several others. And how did it feel when it happened? Small, Joe answered. Like we didn't matter. Exactly how I felt today, Margaret agreed. The difference is I was lucky enough to build a life that gave me the means to overcome it. But what about people who aren't that lucky? Ashley stopped crying and paid attention to the owner's words. Mrs. Margaret, she said hesitantly, I want to learn. I want to change. How can I fix what I did? That's an excellent question. Margaret smiled for the first time. And I have a proposal for all of you. She asked everyone to sit in the lobby chairs. I won't fire anyone today, but I will implement deep changes in this hotel. Changes that will test whether you truly want to grow as people. Michael approached, intrigued. What kind of changes? First, we'll create a monthly program called Open Doors. Once a month, this hotel will host underprivileged families, elderly from nursing homes, refugees, and vulnerable individuals, free of charge. Murmurs arose among the staff. Some seemed concerned about mixing different groups. Second, Margaret continued, All of you, including managers, will spend 1 week volunteering at institutions that serve those in need. I want you to experience firsthand what it's like to be treated with genuine charity." Ashley raised her hand timidly. "But what if some guests complain about the mix of people?" "Excellent question," Margaret smiled. "Those guests will learn that true values matter more than social status. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to find another hotel." Michael seemed worried about the financial impact. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this could affect our profitability." "Michael," Margaret gently interrupted, "do you know what made this hotel successful in its early years?" "No, ma'am. Genuine humanity. When people feel truly welcome, they return and recommend us. When employees work for a purpose greater than money, they deliver exceptional service." She stood and walked among the staff. "Ashley, you'll be responsible for coordinating the Open Doors program. You'll work directly with me to learn how to treat every person with dignity." The young woman was stunned. You trust me after what I did?" "I'm betting on your ability to change," Margaret replied, "because I believe people can grow when given real opportunities." "What if I disappoint you again?" "Then you'll be fired," Margaret said seriously, yet with warmth. "But I don't believe that will happen." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers immensely. Now, continuing, Joe approached with tears in his eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry for staying silent when I saw you being mistreated." "Joe, you're one of our longest-serving employees. Tell everyone what this hotel was like in the early days." The elderly doorman smiled nostalgically. "It was different. We welcomed everyone warmly. There was a gentleman who came every week, always dressed elegantly, until we found out he lived in a boarding house. There was a family who saved all year just to spend 3 days here. Mrs. Johnson made sure they were treated like royalty." "And do you know why I did that?" Margaret asked everyone. "Why, ma'am?" Jasmine asked curiously. "Because when I first came to the United States 50 years ago, I was mistreated in many places. I was young, an immigrant, and spoke English with an accent. Many looked down on me." She paused, reliving painful memories. "I met my husband William when he was a waiter at a small diner. He defended me when other customers made prejudiced remarks about my background. That day, I vowed that if I ever had the means, I'd create a place where no one felt rejected." "And you did," said Marcus, the night shift receptionist. "I did, for a while. But I let my guard down, allowed exclusion to creep back in." Michael stepped forward, determined. "Mrs. Johnson, I want to lead this change. I know I made serious mistakes today, but I want to make things right. How do you plan to do that?" "I'll completely overhaul our training, establish clear protocols for respect and inclusion. And I'll start with myself, by volunteering at the institutions you mentioned." Margaret studied the man who, just hours earlier, had been complicit in discrimination. She saw sincerity in his eyes, but she also knew that real change needed to be proven with actions. "All right, Michael, but I want to see concrete results, not just pretty words." "You will, ma'am, I promise." A week later, the hotel had a completely different atmosphere. Ashley had spent 3 days working at a senior shelter, an experience that deeply transformed her. "How was it?" Margaret asked when the young woman returned to work. "Hard," Ashley admitted. "I met an 80-year-old Syrian woman who came to the United States 2 years ago. She told me how she was humiliated in several places for wearing a hijab. I saw myself in her, ma'am. I saw how much pain I caused." "And what did you learn?" "That every person has a story, that dignity can't be bought with money, and that," she hesitated, "that you gave me a chance I didn't deserve." "Yes, you did," Margaret corrected. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow." The first Open Doors event took place at the end of the month. 15 underprivileged families were hosted for free over a weekend, alongside regular guests. At first, there was tension. Some traditional guests complained about poor children in the pool, about simple elderly folks in the restaurant. But the staff's reaction was completely different from what was expected. Ashley approached a businessman who was loudly complaining about the mix of guests. "Sir," she said with firm politeness, May I explain our new policy? I don't care about any policy. I pay good money not to have to deal with these people. I understand your concern, but our owner believes true hospitality doesn't discriminate. If you prefer, I can help you find another hotel that better meets your expectations. The man was shocked by the polite but firm response. He expected the hotel to bow to his prejudices. Excuse me, are you kicking me out? Not at all. You're welcome to stay, and perhaps discover that interacting with different people can be enriching, but if you're uncomfortable, we completely understand. The businessman stormed off, but his social media complaint backfired. Hundreds praised the hotel's inclusive stance, significantly increasing bookings. By the pool, something magical was happening. Jasmine, the housekeeper, watched a scene that moved her deeply. An underprivileged child teaching a Japanese executive how to blow soap bubbles while their families chatted animatedly. Beautiful to see, isn't it? Margaret approached. Very, Jasmine agreed. That child lost his father last year. His mother works as a cleaner. But look at the joy in his eyes. And the executive? Spent his whole life working, never had kids. Told me yesterday he couldn't remember the last time he played. Margaret smiled, seeing her vision come to life. In the restaurant, Michael observed another special moment. An elderly couple from humble means sharing a table with young entrepreneurs, all laughing at the man's stories about the United States 50 years ago. Mrs. Johnson, Michael approached. I need to tell you something. Go ahead. This program isn't just changing our guests, it's changing us too. My staff is more motivated, more human. The work environment has improved so much. That's exactly what I hoped for, she replied. When we work with purpose, everything feels lighter. There's one more thing. Michael hesitated. I received 3 job offers this week with much better pay. Margaret grew concerned. Are you going to accept any? No, ma'am, he smiled, because I've learned money without purpose is worthless. I want to stay here, helping build what we've started. 2 months later, the hotel had been completely transformed. The positive media coverage brought in new clients who were specifically seeking that unique experience of inclusive hospitality. Ashley, who initially feared being judged by her colleagues for working with underprivileged populations, discovered an unexpected calling. She was studying social work in her free time and planned to implement new social projects at the hotel. How are you feeling? Margaret asked during one of their weekly conversations with the young woman. Fulfilled, Ashley replied without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I feel like my work has real meaning, that I'm making a difference. And your family? How did they react to the changes? At first, my mum was worried. She thought I was being too nice and that it would hurt my career. But when I brought her here to see the project, she cried. Why? Because it reminded her of her own childhood. My grandmother was a housekeeper and was always treated poorly in the places she worked. My mum said if more places were like this hotel, a lot of people would suffer less. Margaret felt deep emotion hearing those words. It was precisely because of stories like Ashley's grandmother's that she had created the entire project. You know what impresses me most about you, she said to the young woman. What? Your humility in recognizing mistakes and your courage to change, that's very rare. I learned from you, Ashley smiled. If you could forgive me and give me a chance, I can do the same for others. By the end of the 3rd month, Margaret organized a special meeting with all the staff. The lobby was decorated with photos from the Open Doors events and testimonials from guests and program beneficiaries. I want to share some numbers with you, she announced. Our occupancy rate has increased by 15%. Our online review score has risen to the highest possible. And we've received a Social Responsibility Award from the Hotel Association. Enthusiastic applause echoed through the lobby. But the most important thing isn't the numbers, she continued. It's the lives we've touched, the changes we've sparked, the example we're setting for other establishments. Joe raised his hand. Mrs. Margaret, can I say something? Of course, Joe. You've turned this place into a real family, not just for the guests, but for us employees too. I've never felt so respected and valued. Joe is right, Jasmine agreed. Before, I was ashamed to tell some people where I worked. Now I'm proud. Marcus also spoke up. Mrs. Margaret, as a gay man, I always felt like I had to hide part of who I was at work. Here, for the first time, I feel completely accepted. Margaret looked around and saw transformed faces, people who had grown, who had discovered the power of empathy and inclusion. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" she asked. "What?" everyone replied in unison. "Knowing that when I'm no longer here, you'll continue this work. You'll carry these values wherever you go. You'll teach them to your children, to others." Michael was moved. "You're not going anywhere. We still have a lot of work ahead." "That's true," Margaret smiled. "I'm thinking of expanding the project to other hotels in the chain." Exclamations of excitement filled the lobby. "But I'll need a special team to lead these changes," she continued. "People who've lived this transformation firsthand." Ashley timidly raised her hand. "I'd like to volunteer for that mission." "Me too," said Michael. "And me," added Jasmine. Soon, all the employees had volunteered to participate in expanding the project. 6 months later, the Grand Plaza Hotel had become a national benchmark for inclusive hospitality. Delegations from other countries came to study the model implemented by Margaret. On a sunny morning, she was in the lobby talking to an international journalist who was writing a story about the project. "Mrs. Margaret," the reporter said, "you've created something revolutionary. How do you explain the success of such a simple idea?" "It wasn't simple," Margaret corrected gently. "It was painful. I had to face my own failures as a leader. My employees had to confront their prejudices. But we discovered that growing as people is worth any initial discomfort." "And what was the most memorable moment of this entire journey?" Margaret thought for a moment. "It was when Ashley, the receptionist who humiliated me on the first day, welcomed an elderly Syrian woman exactly as she had welcomed me months before. But this time she stood up, greeted her with a genuine smile, spoke a few words in Arabic she had learned, and treated that woman like a queen." "And how did the elderly woman react?" "She cried." Margaret smiled with tears in her eyes. "She said she had never been received with such warmth anywhere. Ashley cried too. I cried. It was the moment I knew the transformation had been real." The journalist was visibly moved by the story. "What message would you leave for other business owners who want to implement similar changes?" "That true change starts from within. Creating beautiful policies means nothing if we don't change hearts, and that every person deserves dignity, regardless of their background, age, religion, or social status." After the interview, Margaret walked through the hotel, observing the harmony that had been established. At the front desk, Ashley was simultaneously assisting an international executive and a humble family, treating both with the same warmth and professionalism. In the restaurant, she saw a scene that moved her. A child benefiting from the Open Doors program, teaching a business guest how to draw, while their families shared stories about their respective cultures. Joe approached, as he did every morning, to greet her. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret. How are you feeling today?" "Complete, Joe. For the first time in a long time, I feel complete. You should be proud. You've transformed so many lives." "We transformed them, Joe, all of us together." That afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected phone call. It was from an Arabic businessman who had learned about the project through the international article. "Mrs. Margaret, my name is Hamid Gorbani. I own a chain of hotels in the Middle East and would like to implement your model in our establishments." "I'm honored by your interest, Mr. Hamid. Actually, I'd like to make a proposal. How about we create an international foundation to bring this concept of inclusive hospitality to the entire world?" Margaret was silent for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of the proposal. "That's an interesting idea, but I'd need to ensure the core values aren't lost in the expansion. That's exactly why I want you to lead the project. You've experienced discrimination firsthand and turned pain into positive change." After hanging up, Margaret gathered her core team to share the proposal. "This is a unique opportunity," said Michael. "We can multiply our impact globally." "But it's also an enormous challenge," Ashley considered. "How do we ensure each place maintains the authenticity of what we built here?" "With people like you leading the process," Margaret replied. "People who've lived through the transformation, who understand it's not about rules, but a shift in mindset." The team decided to accept the challenge. In the following months, they developed an intensive training program where employees from other hotels would come to spend time at the Grand Plaza to experience the principles of inclusive hospitality firsthand. The first group of students arrived 3 months later, 20 hotel employees from 12 different countries. Initially skeptical, they gradually transformed as they participated in the Open Doors events and worked directly with diverse populations. One participant, Mary, a hotel manager in Canada, confided in Margaret, "At first I thought it was just a marketing strategy, but when I saw a Syrian refugee teaching my son to play chess during one of the activities, I understood that you're changing how the world connects." "And what was your biggest personal discovery?" Margaret asked. "That I also had prejudices I didn't even know existed, and overcoming them made me a better person, not just a better employee." A year after the initial incident, Margaret organized a special ceremony to mark the date. She invited everyone who had benefited from the Open Doors program: employees, special guests, and media representatives. In her keynote speech, she told the whole story, from the humiliation she endured to the hotel's complete transformation. "Exactly 1 year ago," she said emotionally, "I walked into this lobby as an ordinary elderly woman and was treated with contempt. I left here heartbroken, feeling I had failed my most fundamental ideals." The audience listened in absolute silence. "Today, I return to this same place and see that pain has turned into learning, that prejudice has turned into inclusion, that humiliation has turned into dignity for hundreds of people." Ashley, sitting in the front row, began to cry. Michael was also visibly moved. "But the most important lesson I learned was that real change only happens when we have the courage to face our own mistakes and give people second chances," Margaret continued. She looked directly at Ashley. "Today, I want to especially thank a young woman who made a serious mistake with me but had the humility to acknowledge it and the courage to change. Ashley, could you come up here, please?" The young woman approached, nervous and emotional. "Ashley, would you like to say a few words?" With a trembling voice, Ashley took the microphone. "A year ago, I was a person full of prejudices I didn't even know I had. I treated Mrs. Margaret in the worst way possible because I judged her by her appearance, age, and religion." The audience was completely attentive. "When I found out who she was, my first thought was just to save my job. But she gave me something much greater, the chance to become a better person. Today, I work in something that gives me purpose. I'm proud of who I've become." "And what's your advice for others who might have similar prejudices?" Margaret asked. "That every person you judge by appearance has a story, has feelings, has dignity, and that you're missing the chance to hear incredible stories and learn valuable things when you judge without knowing." The applause was long and heartfelt. Michael was also called to speak. "As a manager, I tolerated discrimination because I thought I was protecting the hotel's standards. I learned that true quality standards include treating everyone with dignity, and an establishment where only some feel welcome isn't high quality, it's exclusionary." Hamid Gorbani, the Arabic businessman who had proposed the International Foundation, was present at the ceremony. "Mrs. Margaret," he said during his speech, "when I heard your story, I thought it was inspiring. But being here today and seeing the results has convinced me that this is the future of global hospitality." "How so?" Margaret asked. "Because you've proven that inclusion and excellence aren't opposites, they're complementary. Your guests don't come here just for the physical luxury, but for the unique human experience you offer." At the end of the ceremony, Margaret made a special announcement. "I want to share that the International Foundation for Inclusive Hospitality has been officially established. We'll bring this model to 50 hotels in 20 countries over the next 2 years." The audience erupted in applause. "And I also want to announce that Ashley will be our first international training director. She'll travel the world teaching other staff how to turn prejudice into genuine hospitality." Ashley was stunned. She had never imagined her life could change so much. "Ms. Margaret, I don't know if I'm ready for such responsibility." "You are," Margaret smiled, "because you've already gone through the hardest transformation, the transformation of yourself." 2 years later, the foundation had expanded to 73 hotels in 28 countries. Each establishment implemented the Open Doors program, tailored to their local reality, welcoming vulnerable populations from their respective regions. Ashley had become a renowned international speaker, sharing her own story of transformation with audiences worldwide. Her TED Talk, How My Prejudice Taught Me About Humanity, had been viewed by over 5 million people. Michael had developed a training manual used as a reference in hospitality schools across the globe. Jasmine had graduated with a degree in business administration and now led the program in 3 hotels in the United States. Margaret, at 72, still traveled discreetly, visiting the chain's hotels to ensure their core values were being upheld. Sometimes she was recognized, other times she went unnoticed, but she always observed how different people were treated. During one of these trips, she was in the lobby of a hotel in New York when she witnessed a familiar scene. An elderly Indian woman was being mistreated by a prejudiced employee. Margaret approached the front desk. "Excuse me," she said to the employee. "Can I help with something?" "Ma'am, please don't interfere. We're handling an operational issue." "What issue?" Margaret pressed politely. "This person is trying to check in, but she doesn't meet our establishment standards." Margaret looked at the Indian woman, who watched her gratefully for speaking up. "I see," she said calmly. "And what exactly are those standards?" "Well," the employee snapped, "people with suitable financial means, who dress appropriately, who have the right skin color," Margaret finished coolly. "I didn't say that," he defended. "You didn't have to. It's written in every gesture." Margaret pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to him. "My name is Margaret Johnson Williams. I'm the founder of the International Foundation for Inclusive Hospitality and one of the owners of this hotel chain." The man instantly paled. I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Margaret interrupted. "You only respect people when you know who they are. True hospitality treats everyone with dignity, no matter who they are." She turned to the Indian woman. "Please accept our sincerest apologies. You'll be our honored guest this week, with all the courtesies of the house." The elderly woman began to cry. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented English. "It's been so long since I've seen someone stand up for a stranger like this." "We're not strangers," Margaret smiled. "We're sisters who just hadn't met yet." 3 months later, that New York hotel had fully implemented the inclusion program. The prejudiced employee had been transferred to the training department, where his first assignment was to work for a week at a refugee center. On the night of her 75th birthday, Margaret hosted a celebration at the original hotel, the Grand Plaza. Hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the project were present: staff, special guests, beneficiaries of the Open Doors program, and representatives from other countries. During the keynote speech, she reflected deeply on the journey. "When I was humiliated in this very lobby 4 years ago, I thought it was the end of a dream. In reality, it was the beginning of something much greater. What we've learned is that prejudice is like a disease. It can be cured, but it requires conscious and ongoing treatment. It's not enough to not be prejudiced. You must be actively inclusive." Ashley, now the international director of the foundation, was present with her own family, including the young daughter she had adopted from a Syrian orphanage. "Mrs. Margaret," she said into the microphone, "you didn't just change my professional life, but you taught me about inclusive motherhood. My daughter Zara is growing up in a world where differences are celebrated, not feared." The 5-year-old girl stepped up to the microphone. "Grandma Margaret," she said in her childlike voice, "thank you for teaching my mum to be kind." The entire lobby was moved by the simplicity and depth of the child's words. "Zara," Margaret knelt to meet the girl at eye level. "Your mother was always kind. She just needed to discover it." "And how did she discover it?" "By making mistakes and learning from them, just like all of us." "Can I make mistakes and learn too?" "Of course," Margaret smiled. "But you're already starting life knowing something very important, that everyone deserves love no matter who they are." Zara nodded seriously and gave Margaret a tight hug. At that moment, looking at this child who would grow up with values of inclusion and respect, Margaret was certain the future would be better. The end of the story. And now, dear listener, We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story of transformation and second chances. Do you believe Ashley truly changed, or should she have been fired immediately? Have you witnessed similar situations of prejudice? Share your experiences in the comments. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories of overcoming challenges and personal growth.